Come closer now. Let the fire warm your bones. The night out here in the west, well, it holds its breath, doesn't it? The stars ain't shy. They press down close, a million cold diamonds scattered on black velvet, watching everything. They've seen empires rise and fall in the dust, seen rivers carve canyons deeper than any man's memory, seen loneliness so vast it could swallow a soul whole. This land, it demands something from you. It tests your marrow, strips away the fancy notions you might have carried in from back east. It asks you, plain and simple, what are you made of? Are you brittle grass, snapping in the first hard wind? Or are you like the granite peaks yonder, weathered but enduring? Tonight, I want to tell you about endurance, about a spirit that refused to break, even when trapped in the smallest, most vulnerable of frames. It's a story about a girl, barely more than a child, lost in the immensity of this land, and the wild heart she found beating alongside her own. Her name was Eliza, and the wind itself seemed to whisper warnings around the place she was forced to call home. It's a tale about cruelty born of bitterness, the unexpected strength found in silence, and how sometimes the wildest creatures hold the key to our own salvation. It begins, as many things do out here, under that vast, indifferent sky, on a patch of ground that felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. Listen close now, and let the story unfold. The place they called Black Creek Ranch wasn't much of a ranch, truth be told. More like a scar on the landscape, a collection of weathered buildings clinging precariously to the edge of the vast Wyoming basin. It sat miles from the nearest neighbor, miles further from the dusty cluster of buildings that passed for the town of Redemption, a name that seemed more like a cruel joke than a promise. The wind was the constant master here, sweeping down from the snow-capped peaks visible on the clearest days, whistling through the ill-fitting boards of the main house, carrying the scent of sage and loneliness. The creek that gave the place its name was often little more than a muddy trickle in the summer heat, choked with alkali dust. It was a hard place, owned by hard people, Silas and Martha Pruitt, and under their roof lived Eliza. Eliza Collins, though no one used her family name much anymore. She was just the girl, or Eliza, usually spoken in a tone that scraped like a rusty hinge. She'd arrived 2 years prior, a pale, quiet 10-year-old bundled off the stagecoach with a small, battered trunk containing all her worldly possessions and the heavy weight of orphanhood. Her parents, good people by all accounts, homesteaders trying to make a go of it further south, had been taken by the fever that swept through the territory the previous winter. Martha Pruitt was her mother's sister, the only family she had left, or at least the only ones willing to take her in. Willing, perhaps, wasn't the right word. Obligated, more like. And they let her feel the weight of that obligation every single day. Now, at 12, Eliza moved through the world with a quietness that bordered on invisibility. She was small for her age, wiry from constant work and meager rations, with eyes the color of a stormy sky that seemed to see everything but rarely met another's gaze directly. Her hair, the color of sun-bleached straw, was usually pulled back tightly, escaping in wisps around a face that was often smudged with dirt or flour. She spoke only when necessary, her voice soft, easily swallowed by the wind or the Pruitt's sharp commands. Silas Pruitt was a man carved from disappointment, tall and gaunt, with a face perpetually soured, as if he'd just bitten into a green persimmon. He worked the small, struggling ranch with a grim determination fueled by resentment. Resentment for the poor soil, the harsh weather, the hand fate had dealt him, and it seemed, resentment for the extra mouth he now had to feed. He rarely spoke to Eliza directly, issuing orders through his wife or with curt gestures. His presence was a heavy, oppressive thing, like a gathering thundercloud. Martha Pruitt was perhaps even harder, in her own way. A thin, bird-like woman with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing, especially not a perceived slight or a task left undone. Where Silas simmered with unspoken bitterness, Martha's displeasure was vocal, sharp, and constant. She saw Eliza not as a niece, not as a child grieving her parents, but as an unpaid servant, a burden sent by God to test her already frayed patience. Every chore Eliza performed, scrubbing floors until her knuckles were raw, mending rough burlap sacks with clumsy fingers, fetching water from the reluctant creek, slopping the pigs, weeding the dusty garden under the brutal sun, was met not with thanks, but with criticism. Faster, girl. Did you drop that bucket again? Clumsy thing. Is that the best you can do? Her words were like pebbles, constantly thrown, constantly stinging. Eliza's world was circumscribed by the boundaries of the ranch and the endless cycle of chores. Dawn broke cold and gray, demanding she rise before the sun to light the fire in the kitchen stove, her small hands struggling with the flint and steel. Her days were filled with labor that would have taxed a grown man, leaving her exhausted by the time she was allowed to retreat to her small, cold attic room after a meager supper, often eaten standing by the stove while the Pruitts sat at the table. Her room was barely more than a storage space, drafty and furnished only with a thin pallet on the floor and her battered trunk, which held her few treasures. A worn calico dress that had belonged to her mother, a smooth gray stone her father had given her, and a tattered copy of Pilgrim's Progress she could barely decipher but cherished nonetheless. Loneliness was her constant companion. The vastness of the land outside mirrored the emptiness inside her. She had no friends, no one to talk to. The Pruitts discouraged any interaction with the few ranch hands Silas occasionally hired for branding or haying, and trips to Redemption were rare, reserved for necessary supplies. On those infrequent journeys, sitting silently in the back of the buckboard, Eliza would watch the townspeople with a hungry curiosity, observing their interactions, their smiles, their easy camaraderie, things utterly alien to her life at Black Creek. She learned early to build walls around her heart, to keep her thoughts and feelings hidden behind a mask of quiet obedience. It was the only way to survive the constant barrage of unkindness, the feeling of being utterly alone and unwanted. Yet even in that bleak existence, a spark remained within Eliza, a flicker of her mother's gentle spirit, her father's quiet resilience. It showed in the way she would sometimes pause in her work, her gaze drifting towards the distant, hazy mountains, a longing in her stormy eyes. It showed in the secret tenderness she offered the chickens she fed, murmuring soft words to them when Martha wasn't listening. It showed in the way she patched her threadbare clothes with painstaking neatness, a small act of defiance against the neglect surrounding her. She clung to the fragmented memories of her parents, her mother singing softly while kneading dough, her father's calloused hand ruffling her hair, the warmth of their small cabin, the feeling of being loved. These memories were talismans, clutched tight in the darkness of her attic room, protecting that small, flickering spark from being extinguished entirely by the harsh winds of Black Creek Ranch. She didn't know how, didn't know when, but deep down, in a place she guarded fiercely, Eliza held onto a sliver of hope. Hope for something more, something different, hope for escape. A hope as wild and untamed as the land itself. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, measured not by calendars, but by the changing slant of the sun, the deepening bite of the wind, the slow greening and browning of the sparse prairie grass. Eliza turned 13, then 14. Her body grew taller, leaner, adapting to the relentless labor, but her spirit remained encased in that watchful silence. The Pruitts' treatment didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, settling into a routine of casual cruelty and neglect. They seemed to barely notice her existence, except when a chore needed doing or a mistake provided an opportunity for sharp words. It was during one of her solitary tasks, checking the rickety fence line at the far western edge of the Pruitts' meager property, that she first saw them. She'd climbed a small rise, seeking a better view of a potential break in the wire, when a movement caught her eye far out on the plains. Not cattle, not deer. Something different. Faster. More fluid. Horses. Wild horses. She froze, sinking slowly behind a cluster of sagebrush, her heart suddenly pounding not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating awe. There must have been 20 of them, a flowing river of horseflesh, bays, blacks, sorrels, pintos, moving across the landscape with effortless grace. They ran not out of panic, but seemingly for the sheer joy of movement, their manes and tails streaming in the wind, their coats gleaming like polished stone in the afternoon sun. Leading them was a magnificent stallion, coal-black, larger than the others, his head held high, surveying his domain. Eliza had seen horses all her life, the plodding draft animals Silas used, the occasional cow pony ridden by a hired hand. But these were different. They were freedom incarnate. They belonged to no one but the land and the wind. They were everything she was not: wild, unbound, powerful. She watched, mesmerized, until they disappeared over a distant ridge, leaving behind only a faint cloud of dust and a profound silence that echoed in her own heart. From that day on, the western fence line became Eliza's secret sanctuary. Whenever she could steal a moment, invent a reason to check the far pasture, she would make her way to the rise, hoping for another glimpse of the wild herd. Sometimes weeks would pass with no sign, leaving her with a hollow ache of disappointment. Other times, she'd be rewarded with the sight of them grazing peacefully in a sheltered coulee, or thundering across the plains, the black stallion always vigilant, always magnificent. She began to learn their habits, their patterns. She saw the foals, leggy and awkward at first, grow stronger, mimicking the movements of their mothers. She witnessed the subtle communications within the herd, the flick of an ear, the stamp of a hoof, the low nicker that signaled reassurance or warning. She felt an inexplicable connection to them, a kinship that transcended words. They were wild, yes, often skittish, bolting at the slightest unfamiliar sound or scent carried on the wind. But she also saw moments of tenderness, mares nuzzling their foals, horses grooming each other, standing flank to flank against biting flies or driving rain. One afternoon, seeking shelter from a sudden, violent thunderstorm that had rolled in darkening the sky, Eliza huddled beneath an overhang of rock near the far fence. The rain lashed down, turning the dust to mud, the wind howling like a hungry wolf. Peering through the deluge, she saw a lone figure struggling against the storm, separated from the main herd, which had likely sought better shelter deeper in the rolling hills. It was a yearling filly, mostly gray, but with patches of white like splashed paint, her coat plastered dark with rain, looking lost and frightened. She whinnied pitifully, turning in circles, clearly disoriented by the ferocity of the storm. Something tugged at Eliza's heart, a pang of empathy so strong it momentarily overrode her ingrained caution. The filly looked so small, so vulnerable, mirroring Eliza's own feelings in the face of the Pruitt's relentless harshness. Without conscious thought, Eliza began to hum softly, a tune her mother used to sing, a simple, gentle melody. She kept her voice low, letting the wind carry the sound towards the terrified horse. The filly's ears pricked. She stopped her frantic circling, head raised, testing the wind. She saw Eliza then, a small figure huddled under the rock, unthreatening. Curiosity seemed to war with fear in the horse's dark eyes. Eliza continued humming, staying perfectly still, making herself small. The filly took a hesitant step closer, then another, drawn perhaps by the soft sound, or maybe just seeking any port in the storm. She stopped a dozen yards away, snorting softly, raindrops dripping from her forelock. Eliza slowly, carefully, reached into the pocket of her worn apron. She pulled out a small, slightly shriveled apple she'd managed to save from the Pruitt's meager orchard, intended as a rare treat for herself. Holding it out on her flat palm, she kept humming, her eyes averted slightly, projecting calm she didn't entirely feel. The filly watched her, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. The storm raged around them, a chaotic symphony of wind and rain. Then slowly, tentatively, the filly stretched out her neck, her wet muzzle quivering as she sniffed the air, then Eliza's outstretched hand. Her lips, soft as velvet despite the rough conditions, gently plucked the apple from Eliza's palm. She chewed it quickly, nervously, her eyes darting around, but she didn't bolt. When the apple was gone, the filly took another step closer, nudging Eliza's hand softly, perhaps hoping for more. Eliza slowly lifted her hand, trembling slightly, and gently touched the filly's wet neck. The horse flinched but didn't pull away. Eliza stroked the damp fur, her fingers marveling at the strength and warmth beneath. She kept humming, her voice barely audible above the storm. For a few precious moments, they stood there together, Girl and horse, two solitary beings finding a fragile connection amidst the tempest. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the worst of the storm passed. The rain lessened to a drizzle, and a watery shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds to the west. The filly seemed to recall herself, tossing her head and backing away, her wild instincts reasserting themselves. She gave Eliza one last look, a long, considering gaze, then turned and trotted off, heading towards the ridges where the rest of the herd had likely weathered the storm. Eliza watched her go, her hand still tingling where she'd touched the horse's neck. A profound sense of wonder filled her, pushing back the loneliness, the fear, the drudgery, if only for a moment. She had touched wildness, connected with it, and it hadn't rejected her. A tiny seed of an idea, impossibly bold, began to germinate in the secret garden of her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone. Maybe she could find a friend out here, in the heart of the wild. She named the gray and white filly, silently, in her mind. Whisper, because their meeting had been a secret, soft thing amidst the roar of the storm, and because the hope the encounter sparked was something she could only dare to whisper to herself. The encounter with the filly during the storm ignited something within Eliza, a quiet determination that began to subtly reshape her days. Black Creek Ranch was still a place of hardship and unkindness, but now she had a secret focus, a reason to venture towards the western boundary that went beyond checking fences. She began to systematically save scraps of food, a crust of bread here, a handful of oats pilfered carefully from the feed bin there, a precious windfall apple or a carrot Nubbin overlooked during kitchen chores. These meager offerings were hidden away, carried discreetly in her apron pocket on her trips to the far pasture. She didn't see Whisper every time. The Mustangs roamed freely over vast territory, their movements dictated by grazing, water, weather, and the watchful eye of the black stallion. But Eliza learned patience. She'd find a vantage point, often the same rocky outcrop where she'd first sheltered, and simply wait, scanning the horizon, her heart leaping at any distant movement that might resolve into the familiar shape of the herd. When she did spot them, she wouldn't approach directly. Instead, she'd find a spot downwind, make herself visible but unthreatening, perhaps sitting quietly on a rock, humming the same soft tune she'd used during the storm. Sometimes, the herd would ignore her, grazing peacefully before eventually drifting away. Other times, the stallion would issue a sharp snort, and the entire band would thunder off in a cloud of dust. But slowly, gradually, they seemed to grow accustomed to her quiet presence. Whisper, however, seemed different. The gray and white filly often lingered at the edge of the herd, her gaze curious, seemingly remembering the girl who had offered comfort and an apple during the storm. One day, weeks after their first encounter, Eliza was sitting quietly, holding out a small piece of dried apple. The herd grazed nearby, watchful but not alarmed. Whisper detached herself from the group, approaching Eliza with hesitant steps, much like she had during the storm. She stopped a few feet away, bobbing her head, testing the air. Eliza remained still, humming softly, her hand outstretched. After a long moment, Whisper closed the distance, delicately taking the offering. This became their ritual, slow, cautious, built on patience and trust. Eliza never pushed, never made sudden movements. She let Whisper dictate the pace. Some days the filly would approach readily, nuzzle Eliza's pockets searching for treats, even allow a brief touch on her neck or shoulder. Other days, she remained aloof, staying with the herd, offering only a distant glance. Eliza learned to read the subtle cues, the flick of an ear, the tension in her stance, the look in her dark, intelligent eyes. She learned that trust, like the sparse grass of the prairie, had to be cultivated gently, persistently. Her interactions with Whisper became the focal point of her otherwise bleak existence. The filly was the only living creature that seemed to see her asterisk, Eliza, not just a pair of hands for chores or a burden to be tolerated. In Whisper's presence, Eliza felt a sense of worth, a connection that nourished her starved spirit. She started talking to the horse, soft murmurs about her day, fragments of memories of her parents, dreams she barely dared to acknowledge even to herself. Whisper would listen, head cocked, occasionally nudging Eliza gently, as if understanding, or at least accepting, the flow of quiet words. This secret life, however, required increasing ingenuity and risk. Stealing away to the western fence took time that Martha Pruitt accounted for with sharp-eyed vigilance. Eliza became adept at finding excuses, a section of fence needing constant repair, searching for stray chickens, gathering firewood from a distant copse. She learned to work faster, more efficiently, during her assigned chores to create these pockets of stolen time. But the fear of discovery was a constant shadow. What would the Pruitts do if they found out? They despised anything wild, anything they couldn't control or profit from. Silas occasionally talked about joining Mustang hunts, rounding up the wild horses to be broken, often brutally and sold. The thought of Whisper suffering that fate sent a chill of terror through Eliza. The Pruitts, oblivious to Eliza's secret world, continued their relentless routine. Their bitterness seemed to deepen with another dry summer, poor crop yields, and mounting debts they discussed in hushed, angry tones late at night, voices carrying through the thin walls to Eliza's attic room. Their frustration often spilled over onto Eliza, the easiest target. The criticisms became sharper, the chores heavier, the meals even scanter. Martha took to searching Eliza's small room periodically, looking for hoarded food or imagined infractions, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Silas became even more withdrawn, his silences heavy with unspoken anger. One evening, Silas came back from redemption in a particularly foul mood. He'd apparently failed to secure a loan he'd been counting on. He stormed into the house, slamming the door, his face thunderous. Martha tried to soothe him, but he brushed her off, pacing the small kitchen like a caged animal. His gaze fell on Eliza, who was trying to make herself invisible while clearing the supper dishes. "You!" he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You eat too much, costing me money I ain't got. Useless baggage, that's what you are." Eliza flinched, her heart sinking. She tried to stammer an apology, but Martha cut her off. "Silas, calm yourself. It ain't the child's fault." Even Martha seemed taken aback by the venom in his voice. "Ain't her fault?" Silas rounded on his wife. "Whose fault is it then? Yours for saddling me with her? Her good-for-nothing parents dying and leaving their troubles on our doorstep?" He kicked viciously at a kitchen chair, sending it crashing against the wall. "Shoulda sent her to the orphanage in Cheyenne. Would have been cheaper." Eliza froze, the words hitting her like stones. Orphanage. The word conjured images of grim institutions, cold charity, a fate even worse than Black Creek. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging, but she blinked them back fiercely, refusing to cry in front of them. She lowered her head, focusing on scrubbing a pot with all her might, trying to block out his hateful words. Martha, perhaps seeing the raw fear in Eliza's posture, tried to deflect. "Now, Silas, that's enough. Yelling won't fix anything. Come have some coffee." She steered him towards the table, murmuring placating words. Silas allowed himself to be led away, slumping into a chair, muttering darkly. But the threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Orphanage. Eliza's hands trembled as she finished the dishes. Later, huddled on her thin pallet in the cold attic, the word echoed in her mind. They didn't just dislike her. They actively resented her presence, saw her as nothing more than a financial drain. The fragile sense of security she'd tried to build, threadbare as it was, felt utterly ripped away. The incident spurred Eliza's interactions with Whisper into a new phase. It wasn't just about companionship anymore. It was about survival. The wild filly represented freedom, escape, the only potential ally she had in this harsh world. She began to think, not just of feeding and petting Whisper, but of truly taming her. Or rather, building a bond strong enough that the horse might allow her to ride. It seemed an impossible dream. Whisper was still wild, still part of the herd. But the threat of the orphanage, the raw hatred in Silas's eyes, fueled a desperate resolve. She started spending even more time near the herd, observing the black stallion, the lead mares, how they controlled movement, how they communicated. She tried mimicking the low, guttural nickers she heard, the soft whistles. She learned to approach Whisper more confidently, projecting calm even when her heart was pounding. She fashioned a makeshift halter from scraps of rope she'd salvaged, hiding it carefully. One blustery afternoon, after weeks of patient effort, after Whisper had grown accustomed to Eliza's touch, allowing her to stroke her neck, her back, even her legs, Eliza took a deep breath and slipped the rope halter gently over the filly's head. Whisper tossed her head, startled, backing away a few steps, her eyes wide. Eliza stood perfectly still, murmuring reassurances, holding the end of the rope loosely, making no attempt to restrain her. After a tense moment, Whisper relaxed slightly, realizing the rope wasn't causing pain, wasn't restricting her significantly. She allowed it to remain. It was a monumental step. Over the following weeks, Eliza gradually accustomed Whisper to the feel of the rope, leading her short distances away from the herd, always letting her return when she grew anxious. She learned to lean her weight against the filly's side, then drape her arm over her back, talking softly all the while. Each small success felt like a victory against the despair that threatened to engulf her back at the ranch house. The bond deepened, becoming a silent pact between girl and horse. Whisper seemed to sense Eliza's need, her quiet desperation. The filly, while still retaining her wild spirit, showed an unusual level of trust, a willingness to accept Eliza's presence, her touch, her tentative attempts at guidance. It was as if two lonely souls had found solace in each other, forging a connection that defied the harsh realities surrounding them. But secrets, especially in a place as small and tightly wound as Black Creek Ranch, have a way of unraveling. Eliza's extended absences, her carefully concealed stash of oats, the smudge of horsehair sometimes visible on her worn dress. These small inconsistencies began to register, even with the self-absorbed Pruitts. Martha's suspicious glances became more frequent, her questions sharper. And Silas, still brooding over his financial woes, started looking for ways to cut costs or generate income, his gaze sweeping over the meager assets of the ranch with a calculating eye. The fragile world Eliza had built with Whisper, her secret hope for freedom, was becoming increasingly precarious. The wind, it seemed, was starting to whisper her secrets, carrying them towards ears that would show no mercy. The tension at Black Creek Ranch simmered like water in a pot left too long on the stove. Silas Pruitt's financial worries gnawed at him, making him shorter-tempered, his silences more menacing. Martha, mirroring her husband's anxiety, tightened her grip on the household, her scrutiny of Eliza becoming almost suffocating. Every dropped spoon, every slightly delayed chore, brought forth a disproportionate torrent of criticism. Eliza felt the invisible walls closing in, the air growing thicker with unspoken resentment and impending trouble. Her stolen moments with Whisper became even more precious, islands of peace in a sea of anxiety. The filly now accepted the rope halter readily and would follow Eliza like a shadow during their brief encounters. Eliza had even managed, heart-pounding, to briefly lay across Whisper's back, feeling the warmth and strength beneath her, the horse standing patiently, accepting her weight. It wasn't riding, not yet, but it was progress, a fragile promise taking shape. She dreamed of galloping away, leaving the dust and bitterness of Black Creek behind forever, just her and Whisper against the wind. The unraveling began subtly. Jed, a taciturn ranch hand Silas hired for a few weeks to help with repairs, noticed Eliza heading towards the western boundary more often than seemed necessary for checking fences. Jed wasn't a cruel man, just weary and resigned to the hardships of his life, but he had a habit of mentioning small observations to curry favor, hoping for an extra $1 or a slightly less harsh word from Silas. "Seed the girl out west again, Mr. Pruitt," Jed remarked casually one evening, leaning against the corral fence while Silas inspected a lame horse. "Seems mighty fond of checking that stretch of wire." Silas grunted noncommittally, preoccupied with the horse. But the seed was planted. He started watching Eliza more closely, his narrowed eyes following her movements when she thought he wasn't looking. He noticed the way she sometimes hurried through her evening chores, the alertness in her posture when she slipped out the back door towards the fields. Martha, too, picked up on the subtle shift. She found a few stray oat grains near Eliza's pallet during one of her searches. Where did these come from, girl? She demanded, holding them out on her palm as if they were evidence of high treason. Eliza froze, her mind racing. I must have spilled some when I was feeding the chickens, Aunt Martha, she stammered, trying to keep her voice even. Martha sniffed suspiciously but didn't press further. However, the incident clearly lodged in her mind. She began timing Eliza's trips to the creek, questioning her about every minute spent outside the immediate vicinity of the house or barn. The net was tightening. The breaking point came on a hot, still afternoon. Silas and Martha had ridden into Redemption for supplies, a rare occurrence that left Eliza with a precious few hours of relative freedom. Seizing the opportunity, she grabbed her hidden stash of treats and the rope halter and hurried towards the western rise, her heart light with anticipation. She found the Mustang herd grazing peacefully in a shallow valley. Whisper spotted her almost immediately, detaching herself and trotting towards Eliza with a soft nicker. Relief washed over Eliza as she greeted the filly, stroking her neck, offering a piece of dried apple. Today felt different, calmer. Maybe today. Taking a deep breath, she led Whisper a short distance away, murmuring reassurances. She checked that the rope halter was secure but not tight. Then, using a low rock as a mounting block, she gently, carefully, swung her leg over Whisper's back, settling herself astride the filly's bare spine. Whisper tensed for a moment, shifted her weight, then stood still, accepting Eliza's presence. Eliza sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe, feeling the incredible connection, the warmth, the living power beneath her. This was it, the dream made real. She tentatively urged Whisper forward with a slight pressure from her heels and a soft clucking sound. Whisper took a step, then another, walking slowly across the grassy flat. Elation surged through Eliza, pure and intoxicating. She was riding Whisper. She rode for perhaps 10 minutes, just walking, getting the feel of the horse beneath her, her heart soaring higher than the hawks circling overhead. She was so absorbed in the moment, so lost in the feeling of freedom, that she didn't hear the approaching riders until they were almost upon her. It was Silas and Martha, returning early from town. They crested a nearby ridge and stopped dead, staring down at the impossible scene in the valley below. Their unwanted orphan niece sitting astride a wild Mustang filly as if she belonged there. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Silas's face contorted, first with disbelief, then with a dark, possessive fury. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed, his voice tight with anger. "So that's what the little sneak's been up to." Their sudden appearance startled Whisper. The filly threw up her head, snorting in alarm, dancing nervously. Eliza's elation evaporated instantly, replaced by icy fear. She saw the rage on Silas's face, the shocked disapproval on Martha's. She knew, with sickening certainty, that her secret was out, and the consequences would be severe. "Get off that horse, girl!" Silas roared, urging his own mount down the slope towards them, Martha following close behind. Whisper, panicked by the shouting and the charging horses, bolted. Eliza, unprepared, clung desperately to the filly's mane and the rope halter. Whisper ran blindly, instinctively heading towards the safety of the herd, which was already scattering in alarm at the commotion. Eliza bounced precariously on the horse's back, the ground rushing by in a blur, terror choking her. Silas, enraged, spurred his horse harder, trying to cut them off. "Trying to run, are you? Stealing wild stock now?" he bellowed. He managed to get close enough to grab for Whisper's rope halter. Eliza cried out, pulling back instinctively. Whisper, terrified by the man leaning towards her, shied violently, rearing slightly. The sudden movement, combined with Silas's lunge, unseated Eliza completely. She tumbled to the hard ground, the breath knocked out of her, pain shooting through her shoulder as she landed awkwardly. Whisper, momentarily free, hesitated, looking back at Eliza on the ground, then at the menacing figures of Silas and Martha. With a frightened whinny, she wheeled and galloped away, disappearing over the ridge after the rest of the fleeing herd. Eliza lay stunned, gasping for air, watching her hope, her freedom, vanish into the distance. Silas dismounted heavily, stalking towards her, his face a mask of fury. Martha remained on her horse, looking down at Eliza with cold disapproval. "Get up!" Silas snarled, grabbing Eliza roughly by her uninjured arm and hauling her to her feet. She cried out in pain. Thought you were clever, didn't you? Sneaking around behind our backs? Taming wild horses? What else you been hiding, girl? I wasn't hiding anything, Eliza whispered, trembling, cradling her injured shoulder. She just came to me. Liar! Silas shook her hard. Wild horses are vermin, or they're money on the hoof. You think you can just claim one? His eyes narrowed, a sudden avaricious gleam entering them. That filly, she's a decent-looking animal. Might fetch a price, broken proper. Eliza's blood ran cold. Sell Whisper? Break her? The thought was unbearable. No, please, don't hurt her. She didn't do anything. She's wild stock on my land, Silas declared, his voice hard. That makes her mine. And you, he glared down at Eliza, you're going to pay for this deception. No more gallivanting around. You'll be watched every second. And maybe, his eyes took on that calculating look again, maybe it's time we found a more permanent arrangement for you. Someone who can handle a deceitful girl. Might even pay for the trouble. Martha nodded grimly in agreement. He's right, Eliza. This cannot continue. We've been too lenient. The veiled threat hung in the air, more terrifying than the thought of the orphanage. A permanent arrangement? Sold off like livestock? Eliza felt sick, trapped. She had flown too close to the sun, tasted freedom for a fleeting moment, only to be dragged back down into a deeper darkness. Silas shoved her towards his horse. Get movin'. You got chores waitin'. And don't think for a second I won't find that filly again. As they rode back towards the grim buildings of Black Creek Ranch, Eliza's injured shoulder throbbed, but the pain was nothing compared to the despair crushing her spirit. She had lost Whisper. She had been discovered. And now, a new, terrifying fate loomed over her. The small spark of hope she had nurtured so carefully felt dangerously close to being extinguished forever. She stared numbly at the desolate landscape, the vast indifference of the sky. Was there truly no escape? The days following the incident at the western boundary were the bleakest Eliza had ever known. Her shoulder, bruised and strained from the fall, ached constantly, a physical reminder of her failed grasp at freedom. But the physical pain was overshadowed by the suffocating atmosphere of distrust and menace that now filled the ranch house. Silas and Martha watched her every move, their eyes cold and suspicious. Her already limited freedoms were curtailed further. She was forbidden from venturing anywhere beyond the immediate yard and barns without explicit permission and supervision, usually from a glowering Martha. The western fence line, her sanctuary, her connection to Whisper, was now strictly off limits. Silas made no secret of his intentions regarding the filly. He spent hours oiling his rifle, checking his lariat, muttering about tracking down that gray piece of horseflesh. He saw Whisper not as a living creature, but as potential cash, a small windfall to alleviate his financial pressures. Every time Eliza heard him talk about it, a knot of fear tightened in her stomach. She pictured Whisper trapped, fighting, her spirit broken by ropes and harsh hands. The image was unbearable. Worse still was the looming threat of the permanent arrangement Silas had mentioned. He and Martha began having hushed conversations late at night, conversations that stopped abruptly whenever Eliza entered the room. She caught fragments, mentions of a man named Barlow, who ran a freighting business in a town further north, a man known for being rough-handed and looking for cheap labor, or maybe even a wife, no questions asked. The implication was clear. They intended to get rid of her, trade her away like unwanted property. The thought filled Eliza with a cold dread that seeped into her bones. Sleep offered little respite. Her dreams were haunted by images of Whisper struggling in ropes, of Silas's angry face, of a rough, unknown man reaching for her. She would wake up in the cold darkness of her attic room, heart pounding, the thin blanket clutched tightly, feeling more alone and helpless than ever. The tattered copy of Pilgrim's Progress offered no comfort. Its allegories of perseverance felt hollow against the stark reality of her situation. She performed her chores mechanically, her body moving through the familiar motions while her mind raced, searching desperately for a way out. But every avenue seemed blocked. She was watched constantly. She had no money, nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The town of Redemption offered no solace. The few times she'd been there, she'd seen how people deferred to Silas, how isolated her life truly was. Even if she managed to slip away, where could a lone girl, barely 14, survive in this harsh land? The orphanage seemed almost preferable to the unknown horrors of being sold off to a man like Barlow. Her only solace came from memories of Whisper, the soft feel of her muzzle, the warmth of her breath, the brief, exhilarating moments of riding free. She clung to these memories, replaying them in her mind, drawing a fragile strength from them. Whisper was still out there, still free. As long as the filly ran wild, a tiny spark of hope remained alive within Eliza. One rainy afternoon, confined to the house mending feed sacks under Martha's sharp gaze, Eliza felt a wave of despair wash over her, so profound it almost stole her breath. Was this it? Was this her life? Endless drudgery, cruelty, and the looming threat of being discarded like trash? Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back, her jaw tightening. No, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. There had to be a way. There had to be. Later that evening, while cleaning out the cold ashes from the fireplace in the main room, a task usually done by Silas, but assigned to her as punishment, her fingers brushed against something tucked deep into a crevice behind a loose stone in the hearth. Curiosity overriding her fear, she worked the stone free. Behind it was a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Her heart pounded as she carefully unwrapped it. Inside were several folded documents and a small, worn leather pouch. One document was a faded copy of her parents' marriage certificate. Another looked like a deed to their small homestead further south, now likely worthless. But it was the third item, a letter tucked inside the pouch, that made her breath catch. The handwriting was faint, but familiar, her mother's elegant script. The letter was addressed not to her, but to Martha. With trembling fingers, Eliza unfolded the brittle paper. It was dated shortly before her parents had succumbed to the fever. Her mother wrote of their struggles, their hopes for the future, but also of a deep-seated worry. She spoke of Martha's long-held resentment, a jealousy stemming from their childhood that had never fully healed. "I fear, sister," her mother had written, "that should anything happen to us, your bitterness might cloud your judgment regarding little Eliza. Promise me you will care for her, not out of obligation, but out of the love we once shared." But it was the final paragraph, tucked beneath the main body of the letter, almost like an afterthought, that struck Eliza like a physical blow. "Silas worries so about money," her mother continued. "I've told him, and I tell you now, the $100 Papa left for me, the money I entrusted to your keeping years ago when we moved west, is to be used for Eliza's upbringing should the worst befall us. It's not much, but it's hers. See that she benefits from it, Martha, for Papa's sake, for mine." $100. Entrusted to Martha. Money specifically meant for her asterisk care. Eliza stared at the words, her mind reeling. The Pruitts hadn't taken her in out of mere obligation. They had taken her in likely for that money. Money they had clearly never spent on her. Money they had kept hidden, pretending it didn't exist. All the neglect, the resentment, the talk of her being a burden. It was all a lie, built on a foundation of greed and deceit. They hadn't just been cruel. They had stolen from her, betrayed her parents' dying wish. A cold, hard anger began to replace the despair in Eliza's heart. It wasn't the fiery rage of Silas, but a slow-burning, righteous fury. They had taken everything from her, her parents, her home, her childhood. And now she knew they had stolen her inheritance too, using it as leverage while treating her like dirt. Suddenly, the permanent arrangement with Barlow made horrifying sense. They needed to get rid of her before she got older, before she might somehow discover the truth about the money. Selling her off would solve their problem permanently. Clutching the letter and the pouch, Eliza quickly replaced the stone in the hearth, hoping her discovery hadn't been noticed. She slipped the bundle into the deep pocket of her apron, the worn leather feeling solid and real against her thigh. This changed everything. She wasn't just a helpless victim anymore. She had proof. She had knowledge. and she had a righteous anger fueling her resolve. The discovery didn't magically solve her problems. She was still trapped, still watched. But now she had a weapon, however small. And more importantly, she had the truth. The knowledge fortified her, stiffened her spine. The fear was still there, but it was now mingled with a fierce determination. She wouldn't let them sell her off. She wouldn't let them break Whisper. She would escape. She didn't know how yet. But the letter felt like a key, a sign. Her mother, even from beyond the grave, had given her a fighting chance. Huddled in her attic room that night, Eliza didn't cry. Instead, she thought, she planned. She pictured Whisper running free, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly believe that she might one day run alongside her. The spark within her, which had flickered so low, now burned brighter, fanned by the winds of injustice and the sudden, unexpected gift of truth. The game had changed, and Eliza, armed with her mother's words and a desperate hope, was ready to play her hand. The discovery of her mother's letter became Eliza's anchor in the storm. The knowledge of the Pruitts' deceit, the tangible proof of their betrayal held tight in her pocket, transformed her fear into a focused, simmering resolve. She still moved through her days with outward quietness, performing her chores, enduring the hostile scrutiny, but inwardly, a plan began to take shape, intricate and desperate. Escape was no longer a vague dream, it was a necessity, a race against time before Silas found Whisper, or finalized the horrifying arrangement with Barlow. She knew she couldn't simply run away on foot. The territory was too vast, too dangerous. She needed Whisper. But how to reach the filly? How to get away when she was watched so closely? Patience, the same patience she'd used to gain Whisper's trust, was her only ally now. She had to wait for the right opportunity, a moment when vigilance lapsed, when circumstances aligned in her favor. She began subtly preparing. Under the guise of mending, she reinforced the seams of her sturdiest dress and salvaged thicker stockings. She started hiding tiny amounts of food again, dried meat scraps, hard biscuits, concealing them not in her room, which Martha might search, but in a loose stone near the dilapidated smokehouse, a place rarely visited. She hoarded matches, a small knife she used for peeling vegetables, anything that might prove useful. Every action was calculated, overlaid with the constant fear of discovery. She also listened, intently, to the Pruitts' conversations, filtering out the usual complaints to catch any mention of Barlow, any hint of Silas's plans for hunting the Mustangs. She learned that Barlow was expected to pass through the area within the next couple of weeks, heading north with a freight wagon. Silas planned to intercept him, finalize the deal. The deadline loomed, pressing down on her. Silas, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated in his search for Whisper. He made several forays out towards the western plains, rifle across his saddle, but the Mustangs were wary now, staying further out, melting into the rolling hills and gullies at the first sign of a rider. His failures only darkened his mood, making him more volatile, his threats against Eliza more pointed. Eliza forced herself to appear compliant, even slightly broken. She kept her eyes downcast, answered meekly, worked diligently, hoping to lull them into a false sense of security, praying they would underestimate her resilience. It was a difficult act, scraping against her newfound anger, but she knew it was crucial. The opportunity came unexpectedly, brought by the very weather that made life on the plains so treacherous. A fierce early autumn storm blew in from the north, not rain this time, but a howling blizzard that arrived with shocking speed, blanketing the land in a thick layer of white. The wind screamed around the ranch house, piling drifts against the doors and windows, isolating Black Creek Ranch even more completely than usual. The storm raged for 2 days. Inside the house, tensions escalated in the confined space. Silas paced like a caged bear, furious at being trapped, unable to work or hunt. Martha fretted over dwindling firewood supplies. Eliza was kept busy, fetching wood from the rapidly shrinking pile near the door, tending the fire, doing endless indoor chores under Martha's relentless supervision. But even the Pruitts' vigilance seemed slightly dulled by the overwhelming power of the storm. Their focus shifted to survival, to weathering the blizzard. On the second night of the storm, huddled in her freezing attic room, Eliza knew this might be her only chance. The blizzard provided cover. The Pruitts, weary from the storm and their own anxieties, might be less alert. The deep snow would make tracking difficult, perhaps impossible. And Whisper, where would the Mustangs go in such a storm? Eliza remembered seeing them seek shelter in deep coulees and among rocky outcrops during harsh weather. There was a place she knew, a deep sheltered draw several miles west, closer than their usual grazing grounds, a place the herd might have retreated to escape the worst of the wind and snow. It was a gamble, a huge one, but perhaps her only one. Her heart pounded with a mixture of terror and fierce resolve. She waited until the sounds from downstairs ceased, until the deep, rhythmic snores of Silas Pruitt vibrated faintly through the floorboards. The wind howled outside, rattling the window frame, a wild symphony accompanying her desperate gamble. Moving with infinite care, she dressed in her warmest clothes, layering everything she possessed. She retrieved her hidden stash of supplies from her apron pocket, tucking the precious letter and pouch securely inside her bodice. She slipped the small knife and matches into another pocket. Then, holding her breath, she crept down the narrow attic stairs. The main floor was dark, lit only by the faint, dying glow from the fireplace embers. She navigated the familiar space by touch, avoiding the creaking floorboards she knew by heart. Reaching the back door, she paused, listening. Only the roar of the wind and Silas's snoring broke the silence. Her hands trembled as she slowly, carefully lifted the heavy wooden bar securing the door. It groaned softly in protest. Eliza froze, listening again. Silence. She eased the door open just enough to slip through, the wind immediately tearing at her, stinging her face with ice crystals. Outside, the world was a maelstrom of white. Snow swirled violently, visibility reduced to mere feet. The cold was brutal, biting through her layers of clothing instantly. For a moment, sheer panic seized her. This was madness. How could she possibly find Whisper in this? How could she survive even an hour out here? But the image of Barlow's leering face, the memory of Silas's threat, the feel of her mother's letter against her skin, these spurred her onward. She couldn't stay. Taking a deep breath, shielding her face against the wind, she plunged into the blizzard, heading west, towards the faint hope of the sheltered draw. Progress was agonizingly slow. The snow was deep, sometimes waist-high in the drifts, forcing her to wade, flounder, expend precious energy with each step. The wind buffeted her relentlessly, trying to steal her breath, whipping her hair across her face, blinding her with snow. She quickly lost all sense of direction, relying solely on instinct, on the faint memory of the landscape now hidden beneath the white blanket, praying she was heading towards the draw. Doubt gnawed at her. Was Whisper even there? Had the herd moved further out? Was she just walking towards her death in the frozen wasteland? She stumbled, falling face first into a deep drift, the snow cold and suffocating. For a moment, she just lay there, exhaustion washing over her, the temptation to simply close her eyes, to give up, almost overwhelming. But then she thought of Whisper again, thought of freedom, thought of the Pruitts' faces if they found her frozen body in the morning. No, she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Gritting her teeth, summoning reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, Eliza pushed herself up, spitting out snow, and staggered onward. She had no idea how long she walked. Time lost all meaning in the howling white chaos. Her feet were numb, her hands raw despite her thin mittens, her face felt frozen solid. Just as she felt she truly couldn't take another step, the ground beneath her began to slope downwards more steeply. She slid and tumbled into what felt like a deeper depression, the wind lessening slightly. Was this it? The draw? She peered through the swirling snow, her eyes stinging. And then she saw them. Dark shapes huddled together against the lee side of the draw, seeking shelter from the wind's fury. Horses, the Mustang herd. Hope surged through her, warming her colder than any fire. She scanned the shapes desperately. And there, near the edge of the group, was a familiar silhouette, gray and white against the snow. Whisper. Eliza wanted to cry out, to run towards the filly, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't startle the herd. Slowly, painstakingly, she made her way down into the draw, moving quietly, humming her familiar tune, letting the wind carry the sound. Whisper's head came up, ears pricked. She peered through the snow, then seemed to recognize the small, approaching figure, the soft sound. She nickered, a low, welcoming sound that was the sweetest music Eliza had ever heard. The filly detached herself from the herd and walked towards Eliza, nudging her gently, as if questioning her sanity for being out in such weather. Tears froze on Eliza's cheeks as she threw her arms around Whisper's warm neck, burying her face in the filly's thick winter coat. "We have to go, Whisper," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "We have to get away. Now." She fumbled in her pocket for the rope halter, her fingers numb and clumsy. Whisper stood patiently, allowing Eliza to slip it over her head. Now came the hardest part, riding bareback, in a blizzard, with only a rope for guidance. It was near impossible, but she had no choice. Using a snowdrift as a mounting block, Eliza hauled herself onto Whisper's back. The filly shifted but held steady. Eliza leaned forward, gripping the rope halter and a handful of mane, pressing her frozen legs against Whisper's warm sides. "Go, girl," she urged, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "Get us out of here, west, away from the ranch." Whisper seemed to understand. Head lowered against the driving snow, she began to move, picking her way carefully up the side of the draw, away from the huddled herd, heading out into the open blizzard once more. But this time, Eliza wasn't alone. She was riding the wind, carried by the wild heart she had dared to trust, plunging into the unknown, leaving the nightmare of Black Creek Ranch behind her, praying they could outrun the storm, outrun the pursuit that was sure to follow when the dawn broke, and the Pruitts discovered she was gone. The blizzard raged around them, but within Eliza, the small spark of hope had ignited into a fierce, burning flame. Freedom was terrifying, uncertain, but it tasted sweeter than anything she had ever known. Riding through the blizzard was a surreal, exhausting ordeal. Eliza huddled low over Whisper's neck, trying to shield both herself and the horse from the biting wind and stinging snow. Whisper moved with remarkable sureness, instinctively choosing the path of least resistance, avoiding the deepest drifts, her breath pluming white in the frigid air. Eliza trusted the filly's instincts completely, offering only gentle pressure on the rope halter to keep her heading generally westward, away from Black Creek. Hours blurred together in a white nightmare. Eliza's limbs grew heavy with cold and fatigue. Maintaining her grip on Whisper's mane and the rope became an act of sheer will. Several times she nearly slid off, only saving herself by locking her legs tighter around the filly's barrel, her muscles screaming in protest. She drifted in and out of a numb daze, her mind preoccupied with one thought: keep moving. Just before dawn, the fury of the storm began to abate. The wind lessened its howl to a mournful sigh, the snowfall eased, becoming lighter, softer. Through the thinning veil of white, Eliza could just make out the first hints of gray light staining the eastern horizon. They had made it through the night. They found temporary shelter in a small aspen grove, the trees offering some protection from the lingering wind. Eliza slid stiffly from Whisper's back, her legs almost buckling beneath her. Every muscle ached, and she shivered uncontrollably, the deep cold having settled into her bones. Whisper nudged her gently, then began scraping at the snow with a hoof, searching for buried grass beneath. Eliza knew they couldn't rest long. As soon as the storm cleared fully, the Pruitts would discover her missing. Silas would come after her, enraged, likely armed, and he would be on a shod horse, faster perhaps than Whisper on clear ground, though maybe not through the deep snow. She had to keep moving, put as much distance between herself and the ranch as possible. She rummaged in her pocket for the meager supplies she carried. A few bites of dried meat, hard as rock, and a piece of biscuit helped stave off the worst of her hunger, washed down with mouthfuls of clean snow. She offered a small piece of biscuit to Whisper, who took it gratefully. While they rested, Eliza scanned their surroundings. The snow lay thick and unbroken, stretching out in every direction, a vast, intimidating wilderness. Where should they go? Her vague plan had been simply to head west, away from the Pruitts, away from Barlow. But west was nothing but more wilderness, miles upon miles of it before reaching any significant settlement or outpost. She thought of the letter in her bodice. The $100. It wasn't a fortune, but it was asterisk hers asterisk. Enough, perhaps, to buy passage somewhere, to start fresh. But she couldn't access it without reaching a town, a place with a bank, or at least someone who might recognize the legitimacy of her claim, someone who wouldn't simply take it from her. Redemption was out of the question. She needed to go further afield. North, perhaps? Towards the territories where rumors said new towns were springing up along the slowly advancing railroad lines. It was a daunting prospect, fraught with peril. As the sky brightened, revealing a landscape transformed by the snow, pristine and beautiful but also unforgiving, Eliza made her decision. North. It felt like moving towards something rather than just running away. She remounted Whisper, her movements stiff and painful. "North, girl," she whispered, gently guiding the filly out of the aspen grove. They traveled all that day, pushing through the deep snow. The going was slow and arduous. The sun emerged, glittering brightly on the snow-covered plains, the glare almost blinding. The initial blanket of white began to melt slightly under its weak warmth, making the footing treacherous, sometimes solid, sometimes sinking deep. Whisper tired, her steps becoming heavier, her breathing more labored. Eliza constantly scanned their back trail, paranoia prickling her skin, imagining Silas Pruitt appearing as a dark speck on the horizon. But the vast, empty landscape remained empty. By late afternoon, both girl and horse were nearing exhaustion. They found another sheltered spot, this time beneath a rocky overhang offering protection from the wind, which had picked up again as evening approached. Eliza gathered some dry twigs and branches from beneath the snow-laden pines nearby, managing, with numb fingers and precious matches, to coax a small, smoky fire into life. The meager warmth felt heavenly. She shared the last of her dried meat with Whisper, then huddled close to the fire, trying to thaw her frozen limbs, her mind racing with anxieties. How long could they keep this up? What dangers lay ahead? Wolves, hunger, getting hopelessly lost? Just as darkness began to envelop the land, Whisper suddenly lifted her head, ears swiveling, emitting a low, nervous nicker. Eliza scrambled to her feet, peering into the twilight, her heart hammering. Had Silas found them? A figure emerged from the gloom. Not Silas, but someone else. A man on horseback, leading a pack mule. He was bundled against the cold, his face obscured by a low-pulled hat and a thick muffler. He stopped when he saw their small fire, his posture wary. "Hello, the fire," the man called out, his voice rough but not immediately threatening. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here after that blow." Eliza instinctively reached for the small knife in her pocket, though she knew it would be little defense. "Who are you?" she called back, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. The man dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Name's Caleb Jones, just a trapper heading north to check my lines." He pushed his hat back slightly, revealing a weathered face, perhaps in his late 40s, with kind eyes crinkled at the corners. He looked tired but sturdy. His gaze took in Eliza, her youth, her ragged appearance, the fine-looking but clearly wild Mustang standing protectively close to her. "You're awful young to be out here alone, Missy, and that's quite a horse you got there." Eliza hesitated. Could she trust him? Years of the Pruitts' harshness had made her wary of everyone, but there was something in his eyes, a weariness mixed with compassion, that felt genuine. And she was desperate. I ran away," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "From folks who weren't kind." Caleb Jones nodded slowly, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Figured something like that." He looked at Whisper again. "That filly looks plumb tuckered. You both do. Mind if I share your fire for a bit? Got some coffee and maybe some jerky that ain't quite fossilized yet." Eliza considered. He seemed harmless, maybe even kind, and the thought of hot coffee was incredibly tempting. "All right," she agreed cautiously, keeping her hand near her knife. Caleb led his horse and mule closer, tethering them near Whisper, who watched them with suspicion but didn't seem unduly alarmed. He unpacked a small pot and grounds, quickly getting coffee brewing over the fire, the aroma rich and inviting. He shared his jerky, which was tough but flavorful, and didn't ask too many questions, letting Eliza volunteer information as she felt comfortable. She told him a heavily edited version of her story, cruel guardians, the threat of being sent away, her escape during the storm with her horse. She didn't mention the letter or the money. Caleb listened patiently, nodding occasionally. Black Creek Ranch, you say? He mused, sipping his coffee. Know the place. Passed by it once or twice. Never cared for the look of the man running it. Pruitt, ain't it? Eliza nodded. Heard whispers in Redemption about him being hard-pressed for cash, and harder on that niece he took in. His gaze softened as he looked at Eliza. Reckon those whispers were true. He fell silent for a moment, staring into the fire. Look, Missy, he said finally. It ain't my business, but heading north alone like this. It's dangerous. Real dangerous. Especially for a young girl. You got anywhere specific you're aiming for? Eliza shook her head mutely. Just away. Caleb sighed. Tell you what. I'm heading north towards the Sweetwater River country for a few days. It ain't much, but maybe you and the filly could travel along with me. Safety in numbers and all that. Might give you time to figure out your next step. Least I can do is make sure you don't starve or freeze first couple days out. Eliza looked at him, searching his face. His offer seemed genuine. Traveling alone terrified her. The brief encounter with Caleb highlighted just how vulnerable she was. Having an experienced woodsman nearby, even for a few days, could make all the difference. And he seemed to respect her bond with Whisper. Thank you, Mr. Jones, she said, relief washing over her. I'd be grateful for the company. Just Caleb, he smiled faintly. And you? Eliza. All right, Eliza, get some rest now. I'll take the first watch. As Eliza huddled near the fire, wrapped in a spare blanket Caleb offered, Whisper lying down nearby with a soft sigh, a fragile sense of hope returned. Maybe she wasn't entirely alone. Maybe kindness still existed in this hard land. But even as she drifted off into an exhausted sleep, a nagging worry remained. Could she truly trust this stranger? And even with his help, could she outrun the long shadow of Silas Pruitt? The chase wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. Traveling with Caleb Jones proved to be a lifeline for Eliza. The trapper was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He was skilled in navigating the snow-covered terrain, finding sheltered campsites, reading the signs of weather and wildlife. He shared his food freely, taught Eliza how to set simple snares for rabbits, though her heart wasn't in catching the small creatures, and showed her how to bank a fire so it would last through the night. Most importantly, he treated her with a quiet respect, never prying into her past beyond what she chose to share, and showing a genuine admiration for Whisper's spirit and Eliza's connection to her. Never seen anything quite like it, he remarked one evening, watching Eliza gently groom Whisper with a makeshift brush of stiff grasses. A wild thing like that trusting a human. Speaks well of you both. Whisper, while remaining wary of Caleb's own horse and mule, seemed to sense that the man posed no threat to Eliza, tolerating his presence nearby. Eliza felt a measure of safety she hadn't known since her parents were alive. The constant gnawing fear of Silas Pruitt lessened slightly, though it never disappeared entirely. She still scanned their back trail frequently, her stomach tightening at the sight of any distant rider, who always turned out to be just a trick of the light or another traveler. They journeyed northward for 3 days, following the contours of the land, gradually leaving the immediate shadow of the territory around Black Creek. The snow began to thin in patches on south-facing slopes, revealing the pale, dormant grass beneath. Caleb pointed out landmarks, named distant peaks, shared his knowledge of the land generously. Eliza absorbed it all, learning, adapting, growing stronger both physically and mentally with each passing mile. On the 4th morning, they reached a fork in the barely discernible trail. Caleb reined in his horse. Well, Eliza, he said, his expression regretful, This is where I gotta head northwest, up towards my main trap lines along the Sweetwater. The trail north from here, it eventually leads towards South Pass City and the Oregon Trail route. Though it's rough going this time of year, Eliza's heart sank. She had come to rely on Caleb's quiet competence, his reassuring presence. The thought of continuing alone was daunting. "Oh," she said softly, unable to hide her disappointment. Caleb seemed to understand. He hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag. "Look," he said, pulling out a small folded map, crudely drawn but detailed. "This here shows the main trails north and west from here. Ain't perfect, but it's better'n nothing. Shows water sources, landmarks, places to avoid." He handed it to her. "And take this." He pressed a small deerskin pouch into her hand. Inside were several strips of dried venison, a small tin of matches, and a few silver coins. "It ain't much, but might help you buy supplies if you reach a settlement." Eliza stared at the gifts, overwhelmed. "Caleb, I can't take your money." "Nonsense," he said gruffly, waving her protest away. "Consider it payment for the company. Been a long time since I traveled with anyone but myself. Besides," his eyes softened, "you remind me a bit of my own daughter. Lost her and her mother to the cholera back east, before I came out here." He cleared his throat, looking away towards the mountains. "Just be careful, Eliza. Real careful. The world ain't always kind, especially to folks traveling alone." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything." He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "Good luck to you, Eliza, and to that fine filly." He gathered his reins. "Keep heading north. Stay off the main trails if you can help it. Less chance of running into trouble. Watch your back trail." With a final nod, he turned his horse northwest and rode away, the pack mule trotting faithfully behind him. Eliza watched him go until he was just a speck in the distance, feeling a profound sense of gratitude mixed with renewed vulnerability. She was alone again, truly alone, with only Whisper and a crude map between her and the vast, indifferent wilderness. But Caleb's kindness, his practical help, had given her more than just supplies. It had given her a renewed sense of hope, a belief that perhaps not everyone in the world was like the Pruitts. Taking a deep breath, she consulted the map, orienting herself. North, towards South Pass City, maybe beyond. It seemed as good a destination as any. She tucked the map and pouch securely inside her clothing, along with her mother's letter. "All right, Whisper," she murmured, stroking the filly's neck. "It's just us again. Let's go." She urged Whisper northward, following a faint game trail Caleb had pointed out, one that ran parallel to the rougher main track but offered more cover among the rolling hills and scattered trees. The landscape gradually changed, becoming more rugged, the plains giving way to foothills cut by deep ravines and rocky outcrops. It was slower going, but Eliza felt safer away from the more traveled routes. She fell back into the rhythm of solitary travel, relying on the skills Caleb had taught her and her own growing instincts. She learned to read the snow for tracks, to find sheltered places to camp, to conserve her meager supplies carefully. Whisper was her constant companion, her confidant, her protector. The filly seemed uncannily attuned to Eliza's moods, offering a comforting nudge when despair threatened, her alert ears catching sounds long before Eliza did. One afternoon, while watering Whisper at a half-frozen creek, Eliza saw tracks in the muddy bank, hoof prints. Shod horses, several of them, and they were recent. Her blood ran cold. Had Silas somehow picked up her trail, or was it someone else? She quickly led Whisper away from the creek, finding concealment in a thicket of willows, her heart pounding. She waited, listening, scanning the surroundings. After what felt like an eternity, 3 riders appeared, following the creek bed. They weren't Pruitt. These men looked rougher, harder, their faces stubbled, their eyes constantly scanning the landscape with a predatory alertness. They wore their guns low, and their horses looked ridden hard. They didn't look like prospectors or homesteaders. They looked like trouble. They paused near where Eliza had seen the tracks, conferring briefly, then continued onward, disappearing around a bend in the creek. Eliza let out a shaky breath. They hadn't seen her, but their presence was a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in this wilderness. Dangers beyond Silas Pruitt. She decided to detour, swinging wider to the east, avoiding the creek valley entirely, even though it meant harder travel through more rugged terrain. 2 days later, her detour brought her to the edge of a high plateau overlooking a wide river valley. In the distance, nestled beside the river, she saw the unmistakable signs of a settlement. Smoke rising from chimneys, the dark shapes of buildings. Consulting Caleb's map, she guessed it might be South Pass City, or a similar mining camp settlement that had sprung up in the region. Part of her felt an urge to ride straight down, seek refuge, food, maybe find someone who could help her with her mother's letter. But caution held her back. Mining camps were notoriously rough places, filled with hard-drinking men, opportunists, and desperation. A lone girl on a fine horse might attract the wrong kind of attention very quickly. And what if Silas had sent word ahead? What if someone there knew him, was looking for her? She decided to observe from a distance first. Finding a concealed spot among the rocks overlooking the valley, she settled in to watch. She saw men moving about, wagons coming and going on a rough track leading north and south. She saw a stagecoach arrive in a cloud of dust, disgorging passengers. It looked busy, chaotic, potentially dangerous. As dusk began to fall, she noticed movement closer to her position, further up the valley rim. It was a lone rider, leading a pack horse, slowly making his way towards the town. There was something familiar about his silhouette, the way he sat his horse. Her heart leaped into her throat. Silas Pruitt. He hadn't given up. He must have picked up her trail somehow, maybe back near the creek where she'd seen the tracks of the shod horses. Perhaps he'd even encountered those rough-looking men. Or maybe he was just doggedly heading north, guessing her direction, checking settlements along the way. He hadn't seen her yet. He was still some distance off, focused on the town below. Panic seized Eliza. He was here. He had tracked her down. If he saw her, saw Whisper. She had to hide, had to get away, but where? The plateau offered little cover. He was between her and the town, and heading down the slope into the open valley felt like suicide. Her gaze fell on the rugged terrain to the west, away from the town, away from the direction Pruitt was heading. It looked like broken country, steep ravines, rocky cliffs, places a horse might struggle. But Whisper wasn't just any horse. She was a Mustang, born to this land, sure-footed and agile. Maybe their only chance was to lose him in the rough country, territory where Whisper might have the advantage. "Come on, girl," she whispered urgently, mounting Whisper. "We have to go, now." She turned Whisper away from the valley, away from the town, plunging into the maze of canyons and ridges to the west, just as the last light faded from the sky. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from Silas Pruitt, who was now silhouetted against the darkening horizon, riding steadily towards the lights of the settlement below, unaware that his quarry had just spotted him and veered off into the treacherous embrace of the wilderness once more. The brief respite was over. The chase was on again, and this time the stakes felt higher, the terrain more dangerous, the outcome more uncertain than ever. Plunging into the broken country west of the river valley felt like entering another world. The relatively open plains and foothills gave way to a labyrinth of steep-walled canyons, knife-edge ridges, and dense patches of pine and juniper clinging to rocky slopes. Darkness fell swiftly, intensifying the sense of disorientation. Eliza let Whisper pick her way, trusting the filly's night vision and innate sense of terrain far more than her own. The moon, hidden behind thick clouds, offered little illumination. They moved slowly, cautiously, the silence broken only by the clatter of dislodged stones and Whisper's steady breathing. Eliza's mind raced. How had Silas tracked her? Had Caleb unintentionally left signs? Had those rough riders she saw near the creek spoken to him? Or was it just relentless, hateful determination? Seeing him silhouetted against the sky, so close to the settlement, had reignited her terror. He wouldn't give up easily, especially now that he likely knew she possessed something valuable. Whisper. He might even suspect she had found the letter, though she prayed he didn't. She knew they couldn't keep moving blindly through the darkness in this treacherous terrain indefinitely. They needed to find a place to rest, a place where they couldn't be easily seen or surprised. After what felt like hours of cautious progress, Whisper led them into a narrow side canyon, almost a crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for them to pass. It opened slightly into a small, sandy basin sheltered on three sides by high rock walls, invisible from the main canyon route. A trickle of water seeped from the rock face, forming a small pool. It was a perfect hiding place. "Good girl, Whisper," Eliza breathed, sliding stiffly from the filly's back. She let Whisper drink from the pool, then tethered her loosely with the rope halter, allowing her to browse the sparse clumps of grass growing near the seep. Eliza herself drank deeply, the cold water soothing her dry throat. She chewed on a piece of Caleb's jerky, her stomach churning too much with fear to feel truly hungry. She needed to think. Silas was heading for the settlement. Would he stay there, ask questions, search the immediate area? Or would he realize she must have seen him and doubled back, perhaps guessing she'd head into this rough country? If he came after her here, in this maze, finding her would be difficult, but being cornered would be fatal. Her best chance, she reasoned, was confusion. She needed to lay a false trail, or at least make her path difficult to follow. She also needed distance. If she could get through this broken country and reach the lands beyond before Silas figured out her direction, she might have a chance. Restless, unable to sleep, she waited for the first hint of dawn. As soon as the faintest gray light filtered into their hidden basin, she was ready. Before leaving, she carefully brushed away their tracks near the water pool and the entrance to the side canyon using a juniper branch, trying to make their passage less obvious. Then, leading Whisper, she headed deeper into the broken lands, deliberately choosing rocky ground where hoofprints would be harder to see, crossing and recrossing small streams to obscure their scent and tracks. The terrain was brutal. They climbed steep slopes covered in loose scree, navigated narrow ledges with dizzying drops below, pushed through thick brush that tore at Eliza's clothes. Whisper handled it with incredible agility, her Mustang instincts serving her well, but it was slow, exhausting work for both of them. Eliza constantly scanned their surroundings, listening for any sound, her nerves stretched taut. Mid-morning, climbing a ridge to get her bearings, Eliza saw him. A lone rider, far below, working his way slowly along the canyon floor they had traversed hours earlier. Silas. He was tracking them. Anger warred with fear in Eliza's chest. His persistence was terrifying. He must have realized she wasn't in the settlement and circled back at first light. Seeing him spurred Eliza to greater urgency. She couldn't just rely on hiding her trail. She needed speed, distance. She urged Whisper onward, pushing them both harder, taking more risks, scrambling down slopes she would have avoided earlier. They descended into another major canyon system, wider than the previous ones, following its winding course generally westward. By late afternoon, exhaustion was setting in again. They found a small cave hidden behind a curtain of ancient junipers, offering shelter and concealment. Eliza allowed them a brief rest, sharing the last of her water and jerky. While Whisper grazed nearby, Eliza examined Caleb's map again, trying to reconcile its crude markings with the rugged landscape around her. According to the map, if she continued west through these canyons, she should eventually emerge onto high plateau country again, rough but more open, potentially leading towards greener valleys beyond the mountains. It seemed the only viable route. Suddenly, Whisper lifted her head, snorting softly, staring intently back down the canyon the way they had come. Eliza froze, listening. Faintly, carried on the wind, she heard it. The unmistakable sound of a horse whinnying, answered by another. Not Mustangs. Domestic horses. And the sound was closer than she liked. Silas wasn't alone. Peeking cautiously from behind the junipers, Eliza scanned the canyon floor. Around a distant bend, two riders emerged. One was Silas Pruitt, the other. Her blood ran cold as she recognized one of the rough-looking men she had seen near the creek days earlier. Silas must have encountered them, perhaps hired them, used their tracking skills, or simply their willingness for potential reward to help him hunt her down. 2 against 1. The odds had just gotten significantly worse. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had to move now. She quickly pulled Whisper back towards the cave, grabbing her rope halter. She couldn't go back down the canyon. She couldn't stay here. Her eyes darted around the small cave. The back wall seemed solid rock. Then her gaze fell upwards. There was a narrow, chimney-like fissure leading up from the back of the cave, possibly towards the canyon rim above. It looked incredibly steep, barely wide enough for a person, let alone a horse. But it might be their only chance. "Come on, Whisper," she urged desperately, pulling the filly towards the fissure. "We have to try." Whisper hesitated, sniffing suspiciously at the dark opening, sensing the difficulty. But Eliza pulled firmly, persistently, her own desperation communicating itself to the horse. Trusting her, Whisper reluctantly entered the narrow space. The climb was terrifying. It was less a chimney, more a steep, twisting crack filled with loose rock and precarious footholds. Eliza scrambled ahead, pulling on the rope, finding handholds, dislodging pebbles that rained down on Whisper behind her. The filly struggled, her hooves slipping on the smooth rock, her powerful muscles straining. Several times Eliza thought they were stuck, that Whisper couldn't possibly make the next awkward scramble. But somehow, fueled by adrenaline and their desperate bond, they kept moving upward, inch by painful inch. Below them, they heard the riders enter the clearing near the cave. "Tracks lead in here, Pruitt," a rough voice echoed up. "Looks like they rested." "Find 'em!" Silas's voice was sharp with anger and anticipation. "She can't have gone far. That horse is worth good money." Sounds of the men searching the cave drifted up the fissure. Eliza frantically urged Whisper onward, praying they wouldn't look up, wouldn't see the telltale signs of disturbed rock. The fissure narrowed further near the top. Eliza squeezed through, gasping for air, then turned, pulling with all her might on Whisper's halter, encouraging the filly through the tightest spot. Whisper scraped against the rock, snorting with effort, then lunged forward, scrambling out onto the canyon rim into the fading sunlight. They had made it, but they weren't safe yet. They were exposed on the rim rock. Below, she heard Silas curse as he likely discovered the fissure. "Up there! They went up the rocks! After 'em!" Eliza didn't hesitate. She leaped onto Whisper's back, urging her westward across the relatively flat rim rock. They galloped hard, putting distance between themselves and the top of the fissure. Behind them, she could hear the sounds of the men trying to find a way up, likely having to backtrack to find a climbable route for their own horses. It bought her precious time. She rode Whisper relentlessly, pushing the filly harder than ever before. The rim rock eventually sloped downwards, leading them off the plateau into another series of rolling hills and valleys, the terrain gradually becoming less broken, offering faster travel, but also less cover. As darkness fell again, Eliza didn't dare stop. She kept moving, guided by the stars that finally emerged from the clouds, pushing westward, always westward. Sometime deep in the night, utterly spent, she finally allowed them to stop in a small, hidden hollow. She slid from Whisper's back, collapsing onto the cold ground, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Whisper stood over her, head low, sides heaving, foam flecking her coat. They had escaped the immediate trap, but Eliza knew Silas and his hired tracker wouldn't give up easily. They were relentless, driven by greed and hatred. She looked at Whisper, the filly's dark eyes meeting hers in the faint starlight. Gratitude and love swelled in Eliza's chest. This horse, this wild creature, had saved her life multiple times over. She owed Whisper everything, and she would not let Silas Pruitt capture her. She would not let him win. Huddling against Whisper for warmth, Eliza finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling into a restless sleep filled with the sound of hoofbeats and the image of Silas Pruitt's hateful face. The climax of their desperate flight was approaching. She could feel it. The confrontation she dreaded, the one she had run so hard to avoid, seemed inevitable now. And when it came, she knew she would have to rely not just on Whisper's speed, but on her own courage, her own wits, and the fierce, protective love she felt for the horse that represented her only hope of freedom. The final race had begun. Dawn broke clear and cold. Eliza awoke stiff and sore, the events of the previous day feeling like a nightmare. But the reality of her situation was starkly clear in the morning light. She and Whisper were exhausted, running low on reserves, and Silas Pruitt, now aided by at least one experienced tracker, was somewhere behind them, relentless in his pursuit. She scanned the landscape. They were in rolling hill country now, dotted with sagebrush and occasional clusters of pine. It offered some cover, but also allowed for faster travel, for pursuer as well as pursued. Consulting Caleb's map, she estimated they were still a long way from any known friendly settlement or area where they might truly lose themselves. Her best bet seemed to be continuing west, hoping to reach a more mountainous region depicted on the map, terrain where Whisper's agility might again prove decisive. They set off at a steady pace, conserving energy, Eliza constantly checking their back trail. The morning passed uneventfully, the vast landscape empty except for the cry of a hawk overhead. A fragile hope began to rekindle within Eliza. Maybe they had finally shaken them off. Maybe the difficult climb out of the canyon had deterred them. But around midday, cresting a low rise, she saw them. Two riders, far back, mere specks on the horizon, but unmistakably horsemen, moving steadily along their trail. Silas and the tracker. Her heart plummeted. They hadn't given up. They were gaining. Panic surged, but Eliza fought it down, forcing herself to think clearly. She couldn't outrun them indefinitely on this terrain. Their horses were likely grain-fed and fresher. She couldn't hide. The land was too open. Her only chance lay in outsmarting them, using the terrain, using Whisper's unique abilities, perhaps even using Pruitt's own anger and greed against him. Her eyes scanned the landscape ahead. The rolling hills gradually gave way to steeper, rockier ground, leading towards a series of higher ridges. On the map, this area was marked as difficult, potentially dangerous. An idea sparked, desperate and risky, but maybe their only hope. There was a place her father had described once, from his own travels years ago, a feature sometimes found in this kind of landscape, a buffalo jump. A cliff or steep embankment, often cleverly disguised by the surrounding terrain, used by native tribes long ago to drive bison herds over the edge. If she could find such a place, maybe she could lure Silas and the tracker towards it. It was a long shot. She didn't even know if such a place existed here, but it was better than simply being run down. "Come on, Whisper," she urged, changing direction slightly, angling towards the increasingly rugged ridges ahead. "We need to climb." The terrain grew steeper, rockier. Whisper scrambled upwards, sure-footed as ever, but slowing considerably. Behind them, Eliza could see the riders closing the distance. They were pushing their horses hard now, sensing their quarry was tiring, heading into difficult ground. As they neared the crest of the highest ridge, Eliza saw it. Not a sheer cliff, but a steep, concave drop-off, partially hidden by brush and the curve of the ridge itself. Below it was a jumble of rocks and scree. It wasn't exactly a classic buffalo jump, but it was treacherous, a place where a horse moving at speed might not see the danger until it was too late. Her heart pounded. This was it. The gamble. She had to lure them close, make them think they had her cornered, then use Whisper's agility to escape while they... She didn't let herself finish the thought. She reached the crest, deliberately slowing Whisper, making it look like the filly was exhausted, struggling with the final climb. She glanced back. Silas and the tracker were only a few hundred yards behind now, urging their horses up the rocky slope, triumph glinting in their eyes. "There she is!" Silas yelled, his voice carrying on the wind. "Nowhere else to run, girl! Give it up!" Eliza waited until they were closer, almost at the crest. Then, with a whispered command and a desperate prayer, she urged Whisper forward, not straight ahead, but sharply to the left, along the very lip of the hidden drop-off. Whisper, sensing the danger, hesitated for a split second, then responded, her hooves finding purchase on the narrow, rocky edge. Silas and the tracker, seeing her move, spurred their own horses forward recklessly, eager to close the trap. They thundered onto the crest, focused entirely on Eliza, not seeing the steep drop just beyond the brush until the ground simply vanished beneath their horses' hooves. There were terrified cries from the men, from the horses. Eliza risked a glance back. Silas's horse, already stumbling, went over the edge, taking Silas with it in a tangle of flailing limbs. The tracker, reacting faster, tried desperately to rein his horse back, sawing brutally at the bit. The horse screamed, reared violently, lost its footing on the loose rock, and tumbled sideways down the steep slope, throwing the tracker clear before crashing heavily among the rocks below. Eliza didn't wait to see more. Sickened by the sounds, horrified by what she had inadvertently caused, yet knowing it was her only chance, she urged Whisper onward, away from the ridge, galloping hard across the rocky plateau beyond. She didn't look back again. She rode until Whisper couldn't run anymore, until the filly stood trembling, sides heaving, lathered in sweat. Eliza slid off, her own legs shaking uncontrollably, reaction setting in. She hadn't intended for them to fall. She had only wanted to escape, but their own greed, their own reckless pursuit, had sealed their fate. She felt a wave of nausea, but also a profound, undeniable relief. They wouldn't be following her anymore. She knelt beside Whisper, stroking the filly's damp neck, murmuring reassurances, her own tears finally flowing freely. Tears of fear, exhaustion, grief, and the overwhelming burden of survival. "We did it, girl," she whispered. "We're free." They rested for a long time on that high plateau, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks. The sun began to dip towards the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Eliza finally stood up, looking westward. According to Caleb's map, beyond these ridges lay greener valleys, perhaps even settlements where she might find help, where her mother's letter might finally mean something. The journey ahead was still long, still uncertain. She was alone, with only a wild horse for company, facing a future she couldn't yet imagine. But she had survived. She had faced down cruelty and desperation, found strength she never knew she possessed, and forged an unbreakable bond with the creature that had become her salvation. She had the letter, she had her freedom, and she had Whisper. Mounting the weary but willing filly, Eliza squared her shoulders, took one last look back at the rugged ridges that marked the end of her pursuit, and turned towards the setting sun. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time since her parents died, she felt not just the weight of the past, but the tentative, fragile possibility of a future she would build herself, one step, one hoofbeat at a time, guided by the lessons of the wild and the enduring strength of her own quiet spirit. The hardest part was over. Now, the journey truly began. The days that followed the confrontation on the ridge unfolded with a different kind of quiet. The constant fear of pursuit was gone, replaced by the simple, demanding realities of survival in the wilderness, but now tinged with a profound sense of liberation. Eliza and Whisper traveled steadily westward, descending from the rugged plateau into gentler country, wide valleys carved by meandering rivers, slopes dotted with pine and aspen turning gold in the autumn sun. Eliza used Caleb's map and her growing knowledge of the land to navigate, finding water sources, choosing sheltered campsites. She learned to forage for edible roots and berries, supplementing the dwindling supplies Caleb had given her. She became adept at reading the weather, the signs of animal passage, the subtle language of the landscape. Loneliness was still a companion, but it felt different now, less like abandonment, more like solitude, a space in which she could finally begin to heal and process the trauma she had endured. Her bond with Whisper deepened into something truly remarkable. The shared ordeal had forged an understanding that transcended words. Whisper seemed to sense Eliza's needs, staying close during the nights, alerting her to any potential danger, responding instantly to her quiet commands. Eliza, in turn, cared for the filly meticulously, grooming her, checking her hooves, ensuring she found the best grazing, sharing her own meager rations when necessary. They were partners, relying on each other completely. After nearly a week of travel, they emerged from the foothills into a wider, greener valley than any Eliza had seen before. A substantial river flowed through it, and dotted along its banks were the unmistakable signs of settlement: small ranches, fenced pastures, distant plumes of smoke from chimneys. According to Caleb's map, this was likely the Green River Valley, a place known for its fertile land and growing communities. Caution warred with hope in Eliza's heart. She needed supplies, needed information, needed to find a place where she could perhaps use her mother's letter. But the memory of the Pruitts, the fear of attracting the wrong kind of attention, remained strong. She decided to approach cautiously, observing from a distance first. She spent a day watching one of the ranches from a wooded bluff. It looked prosperous and well kept, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney of the main house. She saw children playing in the yard, a woman tending a garden, men working with cattle in the corrals. It looked normal, peaceful, so different from the grimness of Black Creek. Summoning her courage, Eliza decided to approach. Keeping Whisper hidden in the trees, she walked towards the ranch house, her heart pounding. She clutched the deerskin pouch containing her mother's letter and the few coins Caleb had given her. What would she say? How would they react to a lone, travel-worn girl appearing out of nowhere? As she neared the house, a woman came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked to be in her late 30s, with kind eyes and a welcoming smile that immediately eased some of Eliza's tension. "Well, hello there, child," the woman said, her voice warm. "You look like you've traveled a long way. Are you lost?" Eliza stopped, suddenly shy, overwhelmed by the woman's simple kindness. I'm Eliza," she managed. "I've come from the east. I'm looking for, well, I'm not sure what I'm looking for." The woman's smile deepened with understanding. "Lost in finding your way, perhaps? Happens to the best of us out here. I'm Sarah Henderson. My husband David runs this ranch. Come on inside, child. You look half frozen and starved. We've got stew on the stove and warm bread." Hesitantly, Eliza allowed herself to be ushered inside. The contrast with the Pruitts' cold, sparse house was stunning. The Henderson home was warm, clean, filled with the smells of cooking, the sounds of children's laughter from another room. It felt like a sanctuary. Over a bowl of hearty stew, the best food Eliza had tasted in years, she found herself slowly, cautiously, telling Sarah Henderson her story. She spoke of her parents, the fever, the Pruitts' cruelty, the discovery of the letter, her escape with Whisper, the pursuit, omitting only the violent end of Silas and the tracker. Sarah listened patiently, her expression shifting from sympathy to indignation, her hand occasionally reaching out to pat Eliza's reassuringly. When Eliza finally produced her mother's letter in the small pouch, Sarah examined them carefully. "Your mother entrusted this money to Martha Pruitt?" she asked, her voice tight with anger. "And they treated you like that? Kept it hidden? That's downright criminal." She looked at Eliza, her eyes filled with compassion. "You're a brave girl, Eliza, incredibly brave, coming through all that alone." Just then, David Henderson entered, a sturdy man with sun-weathered skin and eyes as kind as his wife's. Sarah quickly explained Eliza's situation. David listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. "Pruitt," he muttered. "Heard the name. Never met him, thankfully. Sounds like a miserable excuse for a man." He looked at Eliza. "That horse you mentioned. Whisper, where is she?" "I left her hidden in the woods," Eliza explained. "She's wild-born. She wouldn't come near the house." David nodded. "Smart girl, both of you." He exchanged a look with Sarah, a silent communication passing between them. "Well, Eliza," he said, turning back to her. "You're safe here. You can stay with us as long as you need. We've got plenty of room, and Sarah can always use an extra pair of hands, ones that appreciate good cooking," he added with a wink towards his wife. "As for the money," Sarah added, tapping the letter, "David can help you with that. He knows folks at the bank in the settlement downriver. We'll make sure that money is put safe for you for your future." Relief washed over Eliza so powerfully she almost cried. Safety, kindness, help. It was more than she had dared to hope for. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you both. Eliza stayed with the Hendersons. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. She slowly adjusted to a life she had only dreamed of, a life with regular meals, warm clothes, kind words, and meaningful work that was appreciated. She helped Sarah in the house and garden, learned to milk cows, helped the Henderson children with their lessons. She was treated not as a servant or a burden, but as part of the family. Whisper remained her constant companion. David Henderson, understanding the unique bond, helped Eliza build a small, sturdy corral in a sheltered pasture some distance from the main barns, a place where Whisper felt safe but could still maintain a semblance of her wild freedom. Eliza spent hours with the filly every day, riding her through the beautiful Green River Valley, reinforcing their connection, reveling in the simple joy of freedom and companionship. Whisper, though still wary of strangers, thrived under Eliza's gentle care, her coat gleaming, her spirit bright. True to his word, David Henderson helped Eliza secure the $100 her mother had left. It was deposited safely in the Territorial Bank, a nest egg for her future, whatever that might hold. The shadow of the Pruitts gradually faded, though Eliza never forgot the lessons learned during her ordeal, the importance of resilience, the deceptive nature of appearances, the profound strength found in kindness and connection. She grew from a frightened, withdrawn girl into a capable, confident young woman. The stormy gray eyes still held a depth of past sorrow, but now they also shone with intelligence, determination, and the quiet strength forged in the fires of adversity. She learned to read and write properly, devouring every book the Hendersons owned. She learned about ranching, about the land, about building a life in the West, not through cruelty and greed, but through hard work, community, and respect. She never forgot Caleb Jones, the gruff trapper whose kindness had been a crucial turning point. She often wondered what became of him, hoping he was safe and well on his trap lines. She understood now that the West held both darkness and light, cruelty and compassion, and that sometimes help came from the most unexpected quarters. Her future remained unwritten. Perhaps she would stay with the Hendersons, who had truly become her family. Perhaps she would use her small inheritance to pursue education, or even start her own small venture someday. Perhaps she and Whisper would explore further west, seeking new horizons. But whatever path she chose, she would face it with courage, resilience, and the unwavering companionship of the wild Mustang, who had mirrored her own journey from captive isolation to hard-won freedom. Standing beside Whisper in the golden light of a Green River sunset, feeling the filly's warm breath on her hand, Eliza knew she was no longer just an orphan girl lost in the wilderness. She was a survivor. She was home. Narrator's voice returns, warm and resonant, like the embers of a dying fire. And so, Eliza found her place. Not a place free from hardship, mind you. The West never promised easy living, but a place where kindness could take root, where courage was valued, and where the bond between a determined girl and a wild horse became a quiet legend whispered along the Green River. It's a testament, isn't it, to the resilience of the human spirit, especially when it finds kinship in the wild heart of nature. This land, this vast and unforgiving West, it could crush you, yes. It could strip you bare, leave you exposed to the harshest elements, both natural and human. We saw that with the Pruitts, souls soured by bitterness and greed, turning their hardness outwards onto the most vulnerable. But the land also holds immense beauty, incredible strength, and the possibility of profound connection, like the one Eliza forged with Whisper. It teaches you that survival isn't just about enduring the bad times. It's about finding the courage to seek out the good, to trust again even after betrayal, to recognize kindness when it's offered, like a cool drink of water on a dusty trail. Eliza's story reminds us that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a quiet persistence, a refusal to be extinguished, like a hardy wildflower pushing up through cracked earth. It's the courage to face your fears, to take that leap into the unknown, even when every instinct screams caution. It's the wisdom to recognize allies, whether they come on 2 legs or 4, And it's the understanding that true freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about claiming your own story, writing your own future, finding your own herd, your own safe pasture. The lesson here, maybe, is double-edged, like a well-honed knife. Cruelty and greed leave scars, not just on the victims but on the perpetrators themselves, twisting them into something less than human, leading them ultimately to their own destruction, like Silas Pruitt tumbling into the abyss of his own making. But on the other side, resilience, patience, and the courage to connect with animals, with kind-hearted strangers, with the truth of your own past. These are the things that allow a spirit to not just endure, but to flourish, even in the harshest soil. Eliza didn't just escape, she grew. She didn't just survive, she found a way to thrive, carrying the wild spirit of Whisper within her own heart. Out here, where the horizons stretch forever and the past echoes in the canyons, stories like Eliza's linger. They remind us of the quiet battles fought and won, the unexpected alliances formed, the enduring power of hope against overwhelming odds. If this tale of a young girl and her Mustang stirred something within you, if it made you believe in the strength found in gentleness and the freedom earned through courage, then pass it along. Share the story. Let its echoes travel. Tell us your own thoughts. Where do you find strength when facing hardship? What does freedom truly mean? And if you've got a thirst for more tales from the heart of the American West, stories of grit and spirit that deserve to be remembered, well then, make sure you subscribe. There's a whole frontier of stories out there, waiting by the campfire. Until next time, may your trails be clear, may your water bags be full, and may you always find the courage to ride towards your own horizon. Safe journeys, friends. 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 Journeys,